Welcome to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast, a podcast that brings personal stories from transplant survivors, their families, friends, and loved ones. This is where you will hear challenges and triumphs of everyone involved in this journey. Our guests will offer wisdom, advice, and inspiration on everything you want to know about transplant. My name is Jenny McFarland. I am a transplant survivor, and this is a podcast I wish I had before and immediately following my transplant. Thank you for listening. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. This is Jenny McFarland, your host, and let me just tell you how busy I have been lately. A couple weeks ago, we had the Pre to Post Transplant Social, which was a huge success, and it was so much fun. And before that my life was just chaotic, and I hadn't had a chance to interview or edit any episodes. So hopefully now that that event is done and over, I can get back to the grind and really get these episodes out. So if you have a great story that you want to come on and share and tell us about, then reach out to me via the website, which is www.pre2posttx.com. Or you can reach me on Facebook or Instagram or by email. So let me know if you want to be on the show. And also, please don't forget to leave a rating and review for the podcast. That helps people find the podcast easier. And if you want to leave any comments or if you want to give any suggestions about topics that you want to hear about, please reach out to me via the website also. I have some great ideas for some new episodes that I'm working on. So hopefully we'll get those out soon. Today's episode, I got to interview somebody pre-transplant, which I absolutely love doing that. And I love to hear that pre-transplant people are listening to the podcast because that's initially what it was designed for. But my guest today talks about her struggle with alcoholism and essentially hitting rock bottom with her liver and her journey to heal herself to be taken off the list. It's a great story. It's very inspirational, and I think that you guys are going to love it. So let's go ahead and jump right into the episode. And please help me welcome my guest, Natasha England. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. This is a two-part episode just because we had so much to talk about. So this will be part one, and then I'll have part two out again in a few days. Hi, Natasha. Thank you for being here on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And I've been excited to talk to you because when you reached out to me, you told me all these amazing things that you've been going through. And so I typically start asking my guests, when, where, and why they had their transplant. But since you haven't had one yet,
Yeah.
or maybe not ever, let's start with why you potentially need a transplant and where you're from.
Okay. So, I potentially could need a transplant due to alcoholic cirrhosis. When I was diagnosed, it was summer of 2022, and I was decompensated stage 4. I was in and out of the hospital, so that whole summer, so it was pretty bad. And then I'm originally from Salt Lake City, Utah, which is where I was listed um, for transplant. When I found out I was in Montana, just happened to be staying with my mom for a little bit, and I knew something wasn't right. And they don't even have a hepatologist in the state, let alone
Wow.
a transplant hospital. So obviously, I knew that I needed to make a change there in order to get care.
Yeah.
So,
So you say alcoholic cirrhosis. Does that mean that you were an alcoholic?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it started as self-medication. I mean, I've struggled with substance abuse through a large part of my life. Actually, tomorrow will be 11 years that I've been clean from opiates, which was my first drug of choice. Um, so I got away from that
That's fantastic.
successfully.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you
Um,
said tomorrow? Tomorrow?
yeah, tomorrow. I didn't even realize that till I just looked at the calendar and I was
Well,
like, oh yeah,
congratulations.
that's
That's amazing.
tomorrow. So, yeah, thank you. Um, Unfortunately, cross addiction is a very real thing. And I cross addicted to alcohol. Um, so after it was about 90 days after I'd gotten clean from opiates, my dad passed away very unexpectedly. And then 9 months later, my stepmom, who had been my stepmom since I was 5, she passed away of pancreatic cancer. She'd been
Mhm.
battling that for years. So I experienced a lot of loss, and luckily, I didn't go back to the opiates, but I was finding a little comfort in alcohol at the time. Um, and it was at that point, it wasn't too out of control. Um, but then, it progressed to be a little harder and more intense. I actually moved to Puerto Rico for work for a year, and quite literally being on an island, and not knowing anybody and the language barrier and all of that, I found a lot of solace
Yeah.
in drinking, and it's a
Mhm.
huge part of their culture too. So anyway, that's when it started getting really bad, was there. And then when I moved back, it just kind of didn't leave me. I was hoping that quitting my job there and moving back to the States and surrounding myself by my people, my friends and all of that, it would be a little easier for me to kick. And I then decided it would be a great idea to move to this little 2,000 person town that's just west of Jackson, Wyoming, which was isolation in a
Yeah.
completely different way. Uh, so it was just kind of like a series of events where I was using it to treat
Yeah.
my depression, more or less. And so, anyway, that's kind of how it all started. Um, and luckily, and I say luckily because I did get a DUI when I lived in this little town, but it got me to straighten up enough to where I was actually able to get pregnant. I had a healthy little girl. So that was a huge blessing that came out of all that.
Did you go to rehab and stuff like that after the DUI?
Yes. Yes. So I did go to I had to go to a medical detox because it was so bad. And then I did do a 30-day residential program as well. And it's kind of in the middle of nowhere in central Idaho. It was really beautiful. It was the kind of place where they had horses on the property, and the a beautiful river that ran through, and so it was just very nature, a
And
lot of nature,
and you
very
said that
healing.
was a 30-day,
Yeah, 30 days.
30-day residential program. Okay.
Yep. And unfortunately, addiction is a tricky, tricky monster. And the day that I got out, I went right back to it.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
and this time I was like, well, I won't go to liquor, I'll try to just stick to um wine. I can do a couple of glasses of wine every now and then. Like I can definitely do that. And obviously I could not.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that sickness does to your head is it finds any justification possible uh, to get you to keep going back.
Yeah.
So anyway, uh, yeah, I'd had some pancreatitis scares and things like that. I knew that it was wreaking some havoc on my body. I knew that my liver levels were elevated, but it was nothing scary enough to me to get me to stop, unfortunately. Um, so let's see. So I had my little girl, like I said, luckily she was super healthy and didn't struggle at all throughout my pregnancy. She was the important thing
Yeah.
that was really helping me out. Um, and so I had her, and this was the year of the pandemic. So, then not
Oh,
only
yeah.
am I in this place where I'm already feeling isolated, but then it's even worse because everything's shut down.
Right.
So it was once again, when I felt like I could get in a glass of wine, I started back down that same path. And my partner, he wasn't working. He was able to take a lot of time off after I had the baby and help out. So it's not like I was, you know,
Correct.
just
Drinking and taking
going
care of
after
yourself.
it
Yeah.
with a newborn also.
Right. Yeah.
Um, So anyway, we found out that we could get a pretty decent chunk of money for our house, and we didn't really have anything tying us down. And now that we had a little one, we wanted to be somewhere a little closer to family. So we sold our house and bought an RV and decided to travel around the country for a year. Um, so my daughter was only 6 months old at the time, and we started off on our adventure. And I could not drive a 40-foot Class A towing a Jeep behind.
I can't do that either.
Yeah, yeah, it was like there's no possible way. So it honestly it enabled me um to just live the lifestyle that I'd been living. And I started, like, my hair started falling out, like intense, intense. It was really scary, like how much hair I was losing. My legs were super swollen. So I had all of these symptoms that I hadn't had before, and I wasn't quite sure what they were. I had maybe an inkling in the back of my head, um, but I wasn't sure. So luckily, we had bought our RV in Montana where my mom lives, and so we had the idea of kind of setting that up as like base camp, right? So we set up insurance, thank goodness, to be in Montana. So when we finished our year of traveling through the country, and I was to the point where, like, I can still remember this, but I was sitting in our RV, and my mom came in to talk to me, and I knew who she was, and I knew what she was asking me, and I could comprehend everything she was saying, but I couldn't get any words to come out of my mouth. I was just like catatonic.
Yeah.
Um, and so obviously, everybody started getting a little bit worried.
Yeah.
Um, and so I started having lots of blood work done, and it was bad, but I didn't stop drinking right away. I still took like an extra month to quit drinking, I guess, to more or less just have it be like my final goodbye. Like, okay, I'll take a month, and then
Right.
I'll have to kick that. So, but that's how sick I was in the head with the addiction part of it too, thinking that I could still carry on when I was already very obviously ill. And so I finally stopped, but in that month, and I was warned this by my primary care provider there, he was like, no, I want you to know that like if you don't stop right now, it goes fast, like that you're gonna go from where you're at now to very, very, very sick very quickly.
Yeah.
Um, and I heard him, but I didn't listen. And so my last drink was July 2nd of 2022. And by that time, I was experiencing hepatic encephalopathy. I mean, if you took a good chunk of time and you Googled all of the symptoms that you can experience from cirrhosis, I was experiencing pretty much every single one.
Wow.
Um, and I'm sure you are familiar with, after talking to so many people, with like the MELD scores and things like that.
Right.
So my MELD score was a 31 at its highest. So the like fatally ill is 40, and any healthy person is a 6.
Right.
So I was at a 31 at one point. Um, and that's actually, I was in the hospital that time for renal failure, but there were two different times where I was hospitalized where like I didn't remember that I had a daughter. I didn't remember my partner, who I've known since I was 19. But I didn't remember him. I guess my mom did tell me, she's like, you did tell me at one point that, and this was after the fact, one time when she came in, she said that I told her I remembered her only because of her smell. You know how you just like
Yeah.
have, some people just have a smell, and she's just always had a smell. And that, and then she's got like a dark spot on her arm. And those were the two things that I remembered that told me she was my mom. But aside from that, like I couldn't tell you my name. I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Um, and when they put me in the hospital for acute renal failure that time, I mean, they thought I had maybe days. Um, and so my partner, he was really pushing me. He was like, you really need to uh, start writing some letters to our little girl, because I don't know how long you're going to be around, and she's not going to know you. And I just, how do you do something like that,
Yeah.
and so I don't know if it's because somewhere inside me I knew I wasn't gonna leave, but I just never started those letters. And now I'm so glad I didn't, to an extent, because I'm still here. So anyway, that's what really kicked me in the pants. And I was like, I can't drink anymore. Like, I'm not gonna be able to see her grow up. I'm not gonna see her, go on our first date. I'm not gonna see her drive. Like, she's not gonna have a mom. Um, and so I honestly, I have not had a single craving ever since I went through all of that, just because it got that scary for me. Finally, it's really
Yeah.
sad that it took something like that. Um, but, and this is when I was still sure that I was going to have a transplant. And so we were trying to figure out how to gear up for that. I was trying to get stable enough to uh, get back to Salt Lake, where I'm from, because their healthcare here is um, it's really great. I've always received great healthcare here.
Yeah.
Um, so finally, at the beginning of December of 2022 is when I'd been out of the hospital for almost 2 months, and we were like, okay, I think we can make the move now. Like, it's been
Yeah.
long enough. I think we've got some time to where if it takes us a while to get a new team set up down there, a new team of professionals, we've got some time on our side now. Um,
Were you ever, I know you said you never had a craving, but did you ever worry that maybe that would change and you would go back to drinking?
oh yeah, well, and even now, and this is again, addiction is such a real thing, because even now, after all of this, there's that sick part of my brain that's like, I I could maybe get away with having a celebratory drink. And it's like, no, you can't. You
Yeah.
can't do that.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way. It's crazy what tricks your brain plays on you, um, to make you think that it's okay. So yeah, I mean, it's still, even though I haven't had cravings per se, um, like I'll get in situations where, like, I was at a friend's house and they were having a barbecue, and that's still hard for me. I will admit, like, that's still hard. I usually have like a ginger beer, or something non-alcoholic, of course, but I
Yeah.
always try to make it a point to have something like that in my hand, so that it's like I don't even think about it,
Yeah.
you know.
Hmm.
Um, and my partner, he's amazing. If I was really having a hard time, I know that all I'd have to do is say, like, I can't handle this right now, and we'd go, you
Yeah.
know. He's been my sober buddy, even though he has luckily never struggled with it
Yeah.
before. If I'm just having a particularly rough day, whether it's anxiety or, whatever the case may be, and I just let him know, like, hey, I think I'm going to need your support on this one. He'll make sure that he stays sober with me.
Yeah.
So, um,
That's really good to have. It's really
yeah,
good to have somebody like that for support. I'm sure that is a
yeah,
tremendous help.
yeah, it's huge, because so many of the support groups that I'm a part of on Facebook, I just see how unfortunate some of these people are in their relationships, and how in the beginning their partner will say, oh, I am going to be your biggest supporter. I'm here for you, all of this, and then they're not, and it makes the person feel worse. And so I'm really, really lucky.
Yeah.
Uh, and there's not a day that goes by where I don't realize that. So, um, anyway, so I got to Salt Lake, and um, my my mom, she had she'd been pretty open about what was going on with me and my health, which I wasn't too thrilled about. Um, so that was a healthy thing for me to get out of as well. Um, and so there were various things that made it, I knew that I was going to just get better from being in Utah, like take the healthcare away, but just being here instead of in Montana, I knew it was going to make a difference for me. Uh, so I had an appointment at the University of Utah hospital 2 days after I got here, and met with, their surgeon, my nurse coordinator. I met with the whole team, because luckily the gastroenterologist that I'd been working with pretty closely in Montana, he'd already sent all of my information. Um, so they started to get going with all of their tests and things that they needed on their end. Um, so that started December 7th of 2022. And by February 14th of 2023, I was listed. Um, and in just that amount of time, though, I can't remember what my MELD score was when I first got to Salt Lake, but when I was a 31, that was in mid-October. So between mid-October of 2022 and February 14th of 2023, I'd gone from a 31 down to a 15. And
That's
um,
that's that's a lot. That's
yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, it was a huge deal. Um,
Well, what were you doing differently in that time, other than not drinking, of course, but like,
right, right. So, I, like you said, I obviously stopped drinking. Um, I had figured out what mix of medications worked for me with the liver team. I mean, when I first found out, I was taking tons of vitamins too because I was very malnourished. And then one thing that was suggested to me when I met with one of the oldest guys on the liver team here, he always joked. He was like, "You got to listen to those of us with white hair because we're the ones that have been here the longest. We know what we're
yeah.
talking about." Um, but he really encouraged me to drink 1 to 2 ensures every single day.
Uh-huh.
Um, which, those aren't the greatest. They're also
Yeah.
really expensive, but I I was atrophying so badly. I mean, I could fit my hands around my upper thigh with room to spare. I did not look good. Um, I was really sick. So I feel like that. helped uh, me from progressing further down that malnourishment and from atrophying more. So that helped with that initially. And then I had spoken to the liver team's dietitian, and was instructed to calorie pack. Basically, she was like, if you want to eat a pint of ice cream every night before bed, you go ahead and do that.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
if you're gonna have an apple, smother it in peanut butter. If you're gonna have crackers, you put a ton of avocado on it, just
Yeah.
um so at first that's what I was doing. And they really wanted me on a high protein diet, which for me is a little tricky because for as long as I can remember, I've only ever eaten chicken and turkey just as a personal choice.
Yeah.
Um, so that got a little trickier for me. I had to find some protein powders as well, um, and various things like that. Obviously, low sodium. Anybody that's going through anything with their liver or their kidneys will tell you low sodium. Um, so I really tried to follow as strictly as I could, not not eating processed foods, like even, deli meat. Like if I ever got deli meat, it was like the Boar's Head brand with, not no nitrates or um anything like that.
Right.
But also trying to watch how much sodium was in everything. And so I honestly, it was just mostly diet in the beginning. Unfortunately, I was far too weak to do any exercise, like real exercise. I was lucky if I could get in 5 minutes of walking a day because I was just so weak. Um, and my nap time coincided with my daughters. That was one thing that I had going for me.
Yeah.
Um, so it was a lot of sleep to let my body heal, as much protein as I could take in. And then I really tried to just change my diet. I mean, I never really ate poorly to begin with,
Yeah.
but I definitely didn't make it like a priority, like
Yeah.
um so I would just try to pick things from anybody I talked to, like even my daughter's pediatrician. She was like, if you see something that's on the dirty dozen list, always buy it organic. Just various little things like that I would take and apply to myself as well. Um, let's see. So I mean that I don't want to say that was it initially because it was like a full-time job just trying to eat
Right.
the way I needed to eat. And I had to eat like every few hours because that's another part of your liver not functioning properly is you just like burn through that energy. So you constantly need to be feeding yourself something. Um, and that was a huge adjustment for me, especially because at the time of my diagnosis, I had absolutely no appetite. I did not want to eat anything. So there was a lot of like forcing myself to eat
Yeah.
initially. Um, anyway, so finally, though, when I was able to start exerting myself a little bit more physically, and when I started feeling like I didn't actually need to take a nap every day, Um, we got one of those electric bikes,
Yeah.
if you've heard of those. So that way I had the assist from the
Right.
battery where like I could bike and bike and bike or push myself as hard as I wanted or could. And then when it was just a little too much or I needed a break, I could rely on the bike.
Yeah.
And so that we started doing that a lot. I was actually able to start riding like 5 miles a day, which I would not have even imagined I would have been able to do a
Yeah.
year before that.
Yeah.
So, um, anyway, it was a very, very slow progression, but um it worked. And I mean, in the meantime, I also saw like every kind of doctor under the sun
Yeah.
just to get everything else checked out too, to make sure everything else was all right. Um, so, here we are, and now I can't remember the exact day, but it was around when I reached out to you because I was just kind of on this like cloud nine
Yeah.
moment. But my nurse coordinator called me and she was just like, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know that we think you're too healthy to be listed for transplant anymore."
Thank you for listening to part one. Please tune in a few days to listen to part two. Thank you for listening to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook. Oh, and if you have not signed up to be an organ donor, please visit www.organdonor.gov and register today. You too can save lives.